Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be joined by guest Andy Steele. He is part of what is known as a representative of architects and engineers who are searching for the truth behind 9/11. For instance, did you know that there was a third World Trade Center that fell with the other two skyscrapers? I guess when we're doing things like this, it can get a little confusing. And based on their research and scientific information, there were 3 steel frame buildings that collapsed on September 11th in 2001. The little-known destruction of the third building was World Trade Center 7, which was across from the famous 2 skyscrapers that fell that same day. It looked like a demolition job because of the unmistakable smooth, symmetrical downward motion. We're going to discover more about this and what this commission is all about to find out what really did happen on that fateful day. Andy Steele, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you for having me and for covering this important issue.
You bet. Now, how did this group first decide to come together?
Well, actually, it was founded by our CEO, architect of 30 years, Richard Gage. He was driving down the road to work, I believe, and then he heard Dr. David Ray Griffin, who was not an architect or an engineer, but was very well studied on this aspect of 9/11 and the other aspects of 9/11. And when he got talking about the architecture of and destruction of the buildings, of course, Richard was very intrigued by it, being an architect himself. And what he was hearing was blowing him away to the point where he had to pull over to the side of the road and finish listening to it. This started him off on this journey. He ended up founding Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And the 501c3 nonprofit organization, now currently representing 2,300 architects and engineers who are calling for a new investigation into how these 3 towers fell on 9/11. And as we'll be discussing today, the science doesn't really support NIST's assertions of what happened. NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's the government agency that was tasked with investigating why these 3 high-rises fell that day.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about World Trade Center 7. This seems to be one of those that we really didn't see or hear a whole lot about when it came to this, to all of this.
Right. I think a lot of your listeners may be intrigued to find out that there were 3 towers that fell in New York on the day of 9/11, not 2 as many people are led to believe. World Trade Center 7 was a 47-story steel frame high-rise. It was not hit by an airplane that day. It sustained some small fires that were brought about by the fall of Building 1, the North Tower. And at 5:20 in the afternoon, it fell like a brick. 47 stories, straight down symmetrically in 7 seconds. Now, no steel frame high-rise has ever collapsed because of random office fires. That's the official explanation given to us by the U.S. government for why this building suddenly came down. The only time it's ever happened was on the day of 9/11. So what I challenge your listeners to do, if they haven't done so already, is after they're done listening to this interview, go on to YouTube and find a video of this building coming down. Again, watch it with no commentary from either side. Just watch it for yourself and ask yourself, does this look like a fire collapse? Mm-hmm. Okay, so instinctively, as you see this come down uniformly, straight down, it looks just like a controlled demolition. Mm-hmm. And that prompts people often to investigate more. And when you actually look at the evidence that has been gathered by the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, and certain things that have been omitted by the U.S. government in its investigation, it becomes abundantly clear that we are not getting the real story.
One of the things that really, I guess for me, stands out, maybe it's not a big thing, but in a way to me it is you had a total of 4 planes that day that flew, 2 into the 2 World Trade Centers, one that crashes into a field in Pennsylvania, and then the other into the Pentagon. And the strange thing about it is they're all alleging that these are passenger planes, but the passengers on Flight 93, I believe it was, were the only ones we heard about. It's like, so where were the other passengers on the other 3 planes?
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, our organization...
I know that's not what your forte is, but the fact is, you know, here you got these really interesting, screamingly loud clues, you know, including the destruction of these buildings, and nobody's really answering any of these questions, it seems like.
Well, there's a lot of questions that people aren't answering regarding 9/11, justifying the need for a new investigation, and certain things that are being omitted, as I said. Like, for instance, with the Building 7, their assertion, because I said before that NIST says that random office fires were the cause of Building 7's alleged collapse. Well, let's go into that a little bit further. What they say happened is that fires cause these beams to thermally expand and push a girder off of its seat at column 79 in the northeast corner of the building, and that this caused the chain reaction that brought this entire thing down in 7 seconds. Well, there's a problem with this. One of the first things is that in their analysis, NIST omitted key features of Building 7's design that would have prevented this. They just didn't include them. So basically, to put it bluntly, they left out parts of the building that would have stopped this thermal expansion, such as the stiffener plates, such as the shear studs that would have been in girder 2001, the one that they say walked off at sea. All right. They also inexplicably heated the floor beams, but not the floor slab above them. So this would cause the floor beams, but not the slab to expand. They also didn't take into account the fact that if you had this intense fire that supposedly causes it to thermally expand, the beams would have also been sagging, therefore countering the thermal expansion that they say happened. And also they ignore photographic evidence showing that the fires were burned out by the time this alleged collapse happened, burned out in the area where the collapse initiated. So right there, we have a need for a rerunning of the analysis, which they refuse to do with these proper features included. As well, the most obvious hypothesis to test when you're doing an investigation like this is to look into the possibility that explosives were put in. Forgetting about complicity or blaming anyone, look into the idea that, if you want to think it was Arab terrorists that did this, that somehow they had access to this building and put them in. That's what a real investigation does. That's what science does. But in fact, National Institute of Standards and Technology refused to test their dust samples for the presence of incendiaries or explosives and continues to refuse to do so, citing the circular logic that because they don't expect to find any, they don't need to look for it. That's not a full investigation. So what our position is the most reasonable one that anybody can take. Simply rerun the analysis, do a new investigation, and do these things. Because, I was talking about the dust samples before. We have an independent team of scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen who found the chemical signature of nanothermite in the dust. Now, if you have these assertions being made by independent people, the most rational thing to do is run your own analysis and test them. But rather than do that, the government, U.S. federal government, NIST, has stonewalled and continued to refuse to do this. Talking about this and with people who may not want to acknowledge these facts about 9/11, about Building 7, supporting us is the most reasonable thing to do, simply to address the questions that are being raised. And I always say this on my own show, 9/11 Freefall, is that at the very least, if you believe the official story of 9/11, it would still represent the failure of the U.S. government to do its most important job, which is protecting the American people. So therefore, the American people deserve to have all of their questions answered for the next 100 years regarding this, and to have that full investigation. Because when they don't have this full investigation, when they stonewall, and when the media gives a lopsided coverage of this issue, what it does is it leads to public mistrust and it leads to speculation. Let's end the speculation and simply do a new investigation.
Now, how has the cooperation been moving in the direction of a new investigation?
Well, pretty much the same as it's always been. I think that the passage of time has allowed people to separate themselves from the emotion of this event. Immediately afterwards, people were traumatized all over the country by the image of those buildings coming down, the Twin Towers, all the lives that were extinguished in those few seconds as they came down. And so people were not as willing to listen to this, to wake up to it. But now, here we are 14 years later to the day, and some things have changed. People have separated from the emotion, but there's also been other things in the post-9/11 world, quote-unquote, that we've been experiencing since then that have made people opened their eyes to problems in government and have made them look at this issue in a whole new light. So I think that we are making progress, but there's still a lot of pressure on our elected officials to look away from this issue, to dodge it, essentially. So we're making progress, and Rome wasn't built in a day, and it didn't fall in a day either. But I feel that we are making a big dent in this official story. And in fact, we just sent out a copy of our new booklet called Beyond Misinformation that essentially lays out our case in 50 pages or so to 21,000 Americans. That includes congressmen, governors, architects and engineers all over the country, people who worked on the official NIST reports. So that is available. That's a resource that's available to your listeners. If they want to reach out to others, you can get it at our website. And with all of the information that's coming out about this, I mean, it'll be maybe a case where the government and the media are the last to acknowledge it, but more Americans are waking up to this and at least know this information and are able to carry it forward in their dealings with other issues that might come up, currently.
Now, I think what we want to do, too, for the listeners is to be clear that this effort that this team of people is making isn't to find out who do we point the fingers at. It's basically we just want to take a look at the evidence and get the truth behind what happened.
That's exactly it. There's a lot of misconceptions about what we represent and how the media portrays us.
And it's interesting because I've seen that, you jump at a YouTube video or you come over here for this, and people are saying, well, I think this group here is kind of stirring up the pot, but what I've seen consistently, at least from your perspective, is you're just taking a look at the evidence. What really happened that caused these buildings to fall? The scientific approach to things is it should have been done in the first place, and not necessarily saying, why did it happen? Who was involved that caused this in the first place? That's not really relevant in as much as you just want the specific information, what actually happened from a scientific perspective.
Right. I mean, there is no doubt in my mind, and probably in the mind of a lot of our experts, that this was a controlled demolition. That's what the science proves. Mm-hmm. So the case has been proven. It's just getting traction is where the issue is. But just to show you the power of people power, something else that I didn't mention before in dissecting the official story is that the NIST was forced to admit that Building 7 was an absolute free fall during its 7-second destruction for at least 105 feet of that destruction. Right, now this was done because they were asked a question about it at their technical briefing once the World Trade Center 7 report was released. The question was asked by one of our people, David Chandler. He's a physics teacher. And it embarrassed NIST. They were forced to admit to the free fall, but they overlooked the significance of this free fall acceleration. Mm-hmm. That's why my show is called 9/11 Free Fall, to draw attention to this.
How has that been for you as far as callers call in? Of course, they've got questions to ask. Do you see more of a positive response to what's going on in this investigation, or is it kind of a mixed bag, do you think?
Well, on my show, it's a pre-recorded interview with all the experts week after week, so I don't have callers, but in terms of just my general outreach, I find that the general public is at least aware of this issue, and the response is a lot more positive than it was years ago. People in official positions who could actually do something about it have gone from outright stonewalling and attacking you for attacking the messenger for speaking about this to simply just trying to avoid it, finding it embarrassing, wanting to move on to the next thing. So we are breaking through just through our efforts. And we have a lot of support from people, like from the Beyond Misinformation booklet when we were printing it, people writing in, thanking us for doing this work, ordering booklets and ready to go out and spread it. So I see the support out there, and I believe that, like I'll be out in a restaurant and be talking about this casually with another member of AE, just some internal business, and someone will overhear us and say they've heard about this and do high fives all around. So we are breaking through. It's one of those things that, there's so much weight attached to this event, so much that has been invested in it, and I'm not just talking about the money and the people who made their fortunes off of the post 9/11 world and security and wars and stuff like that, but just people soldiers who went off to go fight because they believed that the nation was under attack, who may have lost an arm or a leg in those fights. I always bring this up because is that person going to be as willing to look at this with a critical eye, is to acknowledge that they may have been lied to? So there's a lot of emotional baggage attached to 9/11. In fact, in our DVD, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, we have psychologists featured who talk about these mental barriers, the cognitive dissonance that makes people not want to challenge their worldview. Now, the great thing about this is, and this is the view that I push, is that people are afraid of what acknowledging this evidence on 9/11 will do to America if they do it. But I don't look at America as like a few politicians and a few people, bureaucrats, covering up evidence. I look at America as people like you, your audience, people who make the wheels turn in our society. And I think that if we acknowledge this, if we have a real investigation and the power of the people prevails, that this will be a great story told in our history books. But we have to be willing to have the courage to look at what is right in front of us and follow our instincts and believe in ourselves. And more people are doing that now because they're not happy with the post-9/11 world, and they want to analyze this event a lot more closely now.
Well, it was pretty strange to see that here is an attack on our soil from an outside source, so to speak, and then we end up becoming the ones who seem to be imprisoned in our own country as a result. But fortunately enough, I understand they've started repealing some of the Patriot Act that came from this. But, getting back to this, for the listeners out there, what can they do to help this group for the 9/11 Truth and its mission? I mean, obviously getting the word out there to get them to look at the video, which I'd like you to also tell them where they can find this again. But what are other things they can do as well?
Absolutely. Well, actually, the best thing you can do is volunteer with us. I'm the operations coordinator at AE 9/11 Truth, so you'd be talking to me, and we can always find stuff for people to do. Believe me, there's tons of work to do in this fight. Also, too, though, if you don't have time to be a volunteer full-time, you can also just do small things. There was a piece of World War II propaganda that I heard on an old radio show a couple of years ago, and it said, the small things done well every day are going to be what wins this war for us. And I apply that to our current war, our war of information, this generation's important battle. Right? It's the small things you do. If you go out and take a brochure, print it out from AE 9/11 Truth, and hang it in your supermarket bulletin board, someone will see that. If you go out and have conversations with people, architects, engineers, or just your friends, and have be what I call a human radio, talk out loud so that other people who are not engaged in your conversation can overhear it. You're getting the word out that way, too, and you're making it less taboo to talk about this. Because when other people talk about it, like you and me right now, openly acknowledge it, it opens the circle and more people are drawn in. They don't feel like they're the only ones who have these suspicions, right? So, that's something else that you can do. You can confront your congressman. We had a campaign where we had people calling in to C-SPAN's Washington Journal every morning, asking congressmen and journalists very specific questions about Building 7. Now, initially, the congressman would just call us conspiracy theorists when we asked them these scientific questions, and that's kind of what we expected them to do, but you got to look at the results of this interaction three-dimensionally, because, there's the interaction with the politician, but there's also the audience watching, and a rational thinking person seeing this interaction, seeing somebody ask a very poignant question about Building 7 backed by science and watching them be responded to by being called a conspiracy theorist by this alleged representative of the people, their eyebrows are going to get raised. They're going to say, well, that's a terrible answer. And then they'll go onto the Internet and look into it further. And as a result of that campaign, by the way, we got Richard Gage onto C-SPAN's Washington Journal, and for 40 minutes of America's time was able to present the controlled demolition evidence, and it was very fair coverage because of all of the people that participated. So it shows the power of the people. We hear these notions that people can't do anything, that they have no power. Well, actually, people have a lot of power when you decide to to use it. For instance, here I am on your show. I've been on other shows today representing AE, getting the word out. I led that campaign for C-SPAN, but you know what woke me up was somebody purposely misfiling a YouTube video on some site so that I would be thinking I'm watching one thing, but then I ended up watching this. So that person reached me. And, you know, like what the seeds you plant today, you may not see them sprout for several years, but that doesn't mean you haven't planted that seed. And you may not even see it sprout yourself, but it doesn't mean that somewhere you're not having an impact. Mm-hmm. So, and with regard to the movie, we have several movies. We have Blueprint for Truth was the first one that came out back in 2008. And then Experts Speak Out came out a few years ago, 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. That one features all our cavalcade of different voices, architects, engineers, metallurgists, chemists, and then the psychologists at the end. And then we have a new one that talks about firefighters and firefighters that support us. You can get those at our store at ae911truth.org, or you can go onto YouTube where they're available for free to watch as well. So just put those into a YouTube search and watch yourself today. And I always challenge people to have a friend watch afterwards with them.
Now, I remember watching the C-SPAN interview that you were talking about, and what I was really surprised by was how balanced just that piece of journalism was. You didn't see the host try to jump in and try to render an opinion as though it was some sort of a fact like you tend to see on your major networks, for instance, where, you know, the host tends to render opinions as though somehow they're facts, even as ambiguous as those opinions are. Where this one, it seemed that there were specific questions that were being asked, and they were specifically being answered, and I found that to be relatively refreshing when it comes to broadcast journalism, because it isn't really something you see a whole lot.
Yeah, I was very pleased with how that interview turned out. Initially, I mean, the whole thing started because they weren't being very fair to people that asked questions about 9/11. It was supposed to be an open forum for people to ask questions of their elected officials, and even when those officials were talking about matters of terrorism and referencing 9/11 as a justification for doing this and that, if people asked questions about 9/11, they were dismissed, belittled, cut off. People would be told that they're not allowed to ask questions about 9/11 on the show. So I think they saw from the tremendous output of various different activists calling in every day for a year and a half that this is really where America stands. You know, there's a article out today talking about the lonely life of 9/11 truthers, but if you actually look at the number of people who question this, actually the lonely people are the people that are still buying the official story hook, line, and sinker. And again, to support us, you don't necessarily need to even agree, ultimately, that it's a controlled demolition. You simply need to agree that there are reasonable questions being asked and that they should be answered. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they're not being answered by our government. Mm-hmm. So anybody who looks at these videos, watches the movies, looks at the evidence, reads the Beyond Misinformation booklet, and agrees that we have valid points should go to ae911truth.org and put their name on that signature, because that is all or put their name, their signature on that petition, because that's all that petition is asking for, simply as a new investigation.
Fascinating stuff. I first of all want to thank you for joining us here on the program today, and it's always refreshing to see people out there who are trying to hold a body of people who are allegedly, you know, existing to protect us, who are actually don't seem to be doing a very good job, and then thinking they could just walk away off into the sunset, not be accountable to anybody. But it sounds like this is a growing effort of all types of people, and not just people who are architects and engineers, but certainly that's a reasonable group of people to get started on an investigation like this. I mean, who knows better about buildings and people who design and build them, sort of a thing. Now, is there a website people can also find out more, and also where they can get the book that you were talking about on 9/11?
Sure. The book is Beyond Misinformation, What Science Says About the Destruction of Towers 1, 2, and 7 of the World Trade Center. I think that's the subtitle. Sometimes they mix up a word on it, but that's the essence of it. You can go to ae911truth.org, go to the store, and there's you can either get a e-version of the booklet or you can have a hard copy delivered. What I like about the hard copies is that it takes it out of the matrix of the internet and the computer world and takes it out into the streets where real change happens. Mm-hmm. And people can read booklets in between doing other things. So absolutely, if you can buy them at cost and hand them out, and it's a great tool for activism. Again, all of the information is out there on the internet. And I mean, there's some things about 9/11 that aren't true out there on the internet. So you have to separate the wheat from the chaff and look at what is actually supported by science. On our side, everything that we do is open and transparent and up there for review by the general public. On this side, things are kept hidden. I mean, for instance, in the case of Building 7, Freedom of Information Act request for the computer model data, the data they use to generate these models that supposedly justify their conclusions, is being kept secret from the American public. The reason that they cite for withholding this data is that it would jeopardize public safety if they were to do so. Now, that explanation is ridiculous on its face. How would it jeopardize public safety, especially for a building that no longer exists?
Right. I just think it's funny that they say public safety. I think they're thinking about their own safety, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? But again, when you have them withholding information, when you have them leaving critical features of the building out and ignoring observable facts, I mean, in the case of the Twin Towers, they were told that this top block acted as a pile driver, driving the bottom portion of the building, the bottom undamaged portion of the building, all the way to the bottom. The problem with this is that this pile driver is destroying itself in the first 4 seconds. It's also a violation of Newton's third law because as it's driving down, it's meeting that same force coming from the bottom up. So it couldn't have driven it down all the way to the ground. We see visible explosions below the collapse line. Squibs, as they're called. You can Google WTC squibs and see this for yourself. The other side sometimes tries to claim that this is just puffs of air being pushed out, but when you actually look at these squibs, there's building materials in them. All right, so this is parts of the building being exploded. We have 118 first responders documented by, taken from the oral histories and then documented by Graham McQueen in the study. And he was very conservative with how he went about doing this study. He didn't include people who said they heard a boom. He looked for very clear words that there was no doubt they were describing an explosion. But where they're describing explosions, flashes of light, all of these things, instances that would make you, have to question, taken from people who were right there. In fact, we have an explosion captured on video by firefighters who are on a payphone. Interestingly enough, HBO censored that out, cut the video off right before the explosion in a documentary they put out in 2002. Someone must have got hold of the footage and put the whole footage on YouTube, and you can watch it for yourself. Where the firefighters are on the payphone, and an explosion goes off. One of them says, "We got to get out of here. 7 is exploding." So there's overwhelming evidence, again, justifying a need for a new investigation that has subpoena power, that looks at all the facts and doesn't just look at a predetermined conclusion, that tests the dust samples for the presence of explosives. I mean, something that most of your listeners, I would assume, would have thought had been done anyway, simply to have a full look into this important event we face so much of our national treasure and national energy on. Again, that is, you can go to ae911truth.org, learn more, go on YouTube, watch the videos. The evidence is out there. It's just going to take the will of the people to get it acknowledged at one point.
Well, that's what we should be doing, is taking action. If something just doesn't feel right and you're not feeling that you're getting the answers that should be given to us, you certainly have to step in that direction and be consistent about that. As you were saying earlier, it's every little thing you do every day that leads up to causing something to be won, and there's so much truth to every little step that you take. And Andy, I want to thank you for taking the step to being on our program today, and I want to wish you good luck on your podcast there as well. And one more time for our listeners, give out that website.
Sure. Well, our organization is ae911truth.org, ae911truth.org. If you want to listen to my show, it's 911freefall.com. And so you can hear my show every week. It airs Thursday night, but there's archives too.
Very good. Andy, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there. Discover what the truth is for yourself, and be sure that you get clear, clean-cut evidence when it comes to getting that, so you don't become another conspiracy theorist, just someone who's curious and inquisitive enough to know that you'll know when you're getting the right answer when you ask the right questions. You can find out more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our free weekly e-news updates, and also you can follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio and like us on Facebook as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. And remember, live your day past halfway.